Okay, let's dive right in. Over the last 3 weeks, we've watched a regional conflict evolve at, well, breakneck speed. What kicked off as a war of shock and awe has now morphed into this incredibly tense, high-stakes standoff. So let's break down that 21-day journey and really get a handle on how we got from open conflict to the strategic chessboard we're all looking at today.
You know, after weeks of missile strikes, troop movements, and all the political maneuvering, intelligence assessments have basically boiled the entire situation down to this one single idea. Everything that's happened so far, every move, has led directly to the sea.
And that right there, that's the million-dollar question we're going to answer. How did the battlefield shift so dramatically, so quickly, from the skies over Iran to the critical shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf? Let's unpack the timeline.
To really understand where we are now, we have to rewind the tape all the way back to day one. See, this conflict didn't start with a standoff. It started with overwhelming force, and it was all delivered from the air. This was the high-intensity opening phase.
That first week was just a furious exchange. It kicked off with large-scale Israeli strikes deep inside Iran. Then, the U.S. got involved, targeting missile and drone infrastructure. Of course, Iran's retaliation was swift, using its now familiar playbook of asymmetric tactics. We're talking swarms of missiles and drones, all designed to overwhelm defenses. It was so intense, it forced the Gulf states to light up their entire air defense networks. A classic modern air war, really.
So the bottom line for week one is this. The goal for both sides was crystal clear. It was all about establishing dominance in the air and trying to cripple the other side's ability to fight back. The thinking was, take out the military assets and key sites before this thing could escalate even further. But that's not exactly what happened.
Because then we hit the second week, and this is where the entire conflict just pivots. The center of gravity shifts, and I mean dramatically, from land and air targets to the open water. Suddenly, the war went to sea.
All of a sudden, the headlines weren't about missile sites anymore. They were about commercial tankers. We started seeing attacks and harassment of civilian ships, which immediately caused a huge drop in traffic through the critical Strait of Hormuz. In response, a U.S.-led coalition began deploying long-range strategic bombers, which is a very clear signal of intent, and for the first time we started hearing serious talk about organizing international naval convoys.
And if you're wondering why this shift to the sea is such a big deal, you just have to look at this number. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just some random body of water. It's the artery for one-fifth of the entire world's seaborne oil supply. Threatening this choke point isn't just a regional issue, it's a direct threat to the global economy.
And this just perfectly illustrates the new reality. By the end of week two, this was no longer just a regional military conflict. Nope. It had become a global issue of energy security, with the world's economy suddenly and very directly at stake.
Which brings us right up to today, week 3. The high-intensity back and forth has pretty much faded, and it's been replaced by what analysts are now calling the sustained pressure phase. It's basically a calculated, high-stakes waiting game.
Right now, the situation is all about strategic positioning. The pace of airstrikes has slowed way down, which likely means both sides are assessing damage and planning their next move. But clear signals are still being sent, like that very deliberate strike on Iran's Karg Island oil terminal. At the same time, you've got coalition navies tightening their coordination, reports of U.S. Marines deploying to the region, and literally, you have tankers clustering outside the strait, just waiting for a security guarantee.
So, to really understand Iran's moves here, from those initial drone barrages to threatening oil tankers, we need to put a name to their playbook. It's called asymmetric deterrence. At its core, it's their entire strategy. Instead of meeting a technologically superior military head-on in a fight they might not win, Iran uses these non-traditional tools, drones, fast attack craft, proxies, to raise the cost of conflict for their opponent. The goal is to deter further attacks without triggering an all-out war.
This table really sums up the opposing goals perfectly. On one side, you have the coalition getting ready for escort operations, and their whole aim is to control the situation while keeping up the pressure. On the other side, Iran is trying to avoid a direct naval fight, but they're also making it very clear they're ready to escalate if they get pushed too far. You can see how both sides are walking a very thin tightrope here.
So with the board set just like this, the big question is, what happens next? Let's look at the key indicators, the things you should be watching for that will signal the next phase of this conflict.
Over the next week or so, analysts expect this is how things could play out. First, keep an eye out for a formal public announcement of a naval coalition to escort ships. That's going to be followed by the real test, the first tanker actually trying to pass through the strait under military protection. How Iran responds to that moment, whether with probing attacks or just harassment, that is going to be the critical moment.
So yeah, the crucial point is this. It all comes down to the convoys. Whether they actually begin and whether they get challenged, that's the event that is going to define the next chapter of this crisis. Everything for the past 3 weeks has been building to this exact moment at sea.
And that really brings us to the ultimate strategic reality of the situation. This conflict has totally transformed. It's no longer a sprint to see who can land the first knockout blow. It has become a marathon, a contest of endurance, of leverage, and of pure nerve. The winner won't be who strikes the hardest, but who can best control that ladder of escalation.
Which leaves us with the final defining question, doesn't it? As this whole thing settles into a tense war of attrition and political will, who has the greater stamina? In this new contest of endurance, who is most prepared to wait it out?